Alright, welcome back to the FastGadgets Tutorial Series. This is Introduction to Microsoft Access 2013 Part 2. So if you have not completed Part 1, you will not have completed the database yet. So please look down in the description for a link to the video for Part 1 where we actually created the Bavint Publishing database. In this particular tutorial, we're going to go through and work on querying the database. There are many different queries that we can actually perform against the database, and typically the reason for doing a query is to discover information about the database. For example, we might want a query that gives the customer number, customer name, amount paid, and current due for customer number CSU10. There might be a query we need where we list the customer number, customer name, book rep number, and amount paid for all customers. Then we want to sort the results by the book rep number. And with customers with the same book rep number, sort them again by amount paid. And that type of query is actually called a Crosstab query, and we're going to do that today as an example. So there's many different queries, but the main goal is to get information out of the database that is useful to us. As it is, the database contains data, but without queries, we really can't produce useful information. And as you'll see in the queries that we go through, you have to take great care in how you formulate the queries, because just one incorrect setting, for example, the sort order or misselecting information, will cause the query to be incorrect, and it will display incorrect information. So the objectives for this particular tutorial are creating queries in Design View. We're going to put criteria in the queries to help us narrow down what we want in our query results. We'll sort the data alphabetically, ascending and descending, numerically. We'll join two tables. So we're going to do a query that actually uses information from both tables that are in our database, the book rep and the customer. And we will perform some calculations in the queries. We'll do some crosstabs. And once we get through all those queries, you should have a really good understanding of how to pull concrete information out of the database. So I've already opened my database, but if you need to, pause the video and take a moment to open your Bavint Publishing database. If you followed Part 1, in the description of the Part 1 video are all the files that you'll need and the instructions to create this particular database. I can open book rep and I can open the customer table and see that I have all my data. So again, as a refresher, book rep contains specifically employee records, and each row represents a record. Each column is a field of information in a record. As an example, last name would be a field that we would populate with information about this record. And this person here is Melina Perez, for example. And we have the same thing with customer, and you'll notice though that the customer name is actually one field because it actually represents an institution, not an individual. So I'll go ahead and close those tables. All I have to do is click the X in the right hand corner to close the tables. Now we've done a couple of queries in Part 1, but we're going to do some much more advanced queries. In this case, we're not going to be using the query wizard, we're going to be doing query design. So now notice right now I'm on the customer table. It doesn't really matter which table you're on when you create a query, like it does with reports and forms. So if I use query design, I immediately am presented with a show table dialog box. And depending on what information I need from the database will determine which of these tables I'll select. And in some cases, we're going to use more than one table. In this case, I'm going to click the customer table, and I will click Add, which will add the table here. I'm going to go ahead and click Close because I really only need this one table. Now you'll notice that by default I'm unable to see the entire contents of the table, each of the fields. If I move my mouse to the bottom and wait until I see the double arrows, the black arrows facing away from each other, I can click and hold the left mouse button and drag down until I reveal all of the field names in my particular database. Okay, so what do we want to add for this particular query? Well, as an example, I'm going to add customer number. If I double click customer number, it will automatically be added to the query. And then I can add customer name. I can add amount paid. And for this particular query, I'm going to add current due. Now, if I want to use specific criteria in this particular query, I can type in a customer number, for example, CSU 10. So this is a customer number that we have. If I click the Run button, the query will run and it'll show me only customer number CSU10, their name, amount paid, and if they have any current due fees. So if you're following along, you know that I'm using the Cashman series book, Microsoft Office 2013 Introductory. Author is Vermaat, V-E-R-M-A-A-T. If you're interested in purchasing the book, there's an Amazon link inside the description of this video. You do not need to have it, however, for this particular video series. However, just to let you know, some of the query names may be named following the book content. So this particular query, I can go ahead and do a save, and it'll ask me what do I want to call the query name. You can give the query name anything you want. You usually want it to be something that will help you in the future identify it. So I might put CSU 10, maybe current due, and I will put the word query in it just in case we have so many queries that users have to scroll down, just to help them remember that this is actually a query. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now this particular query I'm going to go ahead and close, or if I wanted to, I could change to the View button, and I already have the field selected. And if I want to, I could go ahead and delete the criteria. One thing to keep in mind, however, is this query is now saved as CSU10 current due. So we're going to want to be very careful because we don't want to overwrite the previous query. So now I would need to click File, Save As, and then Save Object As, and then Save As again, and now it will ask me what would you like to call this query. Since this is a sample of the wildcard that we're going to use here, I'm just going to put a wildcard query as the name, and then I'll say OK. So now we're not in danger of overwriting that previous query that we made. Now there are wildcards, much like an operating system, that we can use in a query, and what wildcards essentially mean is if we put an asterisk in our query, we can tell the database to search for all records that meet a certain criteria. Now it's a little easier to see it than talk about it. So let me give you an example. If we go to customer name in the criteria line here, and I put in a capital S and then an asterisk, we are basically asking the database, show me all records where the customer name begins with the letter S and anything after it. So the asterisk essentially indicates that we want to see all the records with anything starting with the letter S. So if I run this, I'll see that I actually have two different queries, two different records, Stallone Community College and Seaborn College. And of course I can just go ahead and click save, and it'll save this query for me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this query. And we're going to move on to the next query, which is to use criteria even if the field is not being shown in the results. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the Create tab, Query Design again. We're going to add customer, and we'll click Add and then Close. I'm going to drag down so that I can see all the fields. And for this query, I'm going to add customer number, customer name, and keep in mind I'm just double clicking on these, amount paid, current due, and finally city. Now I can type in, just as before, a criteria. Let's say we're looking specifically for the city of Gaston. If I unselect the checkbox, it will now run the query, and it will show me all customer records that are not in the city, that are in the city of Gaston, but it will not display the city. So let's go ahead and run it. So we have two records that are in the city of Gaston. Now let's go back to design view and just prove the point here. If I turn this checkbox back on and then I run the query again, you can now see we have the exact same two records and the city is Gaston. So I'll go back to view, and I'm going to unselect Gaston, and I will save this query. And I will call this one hide a field. How about from display? That way, if you come back into this database and you want to use the database to see examples of different queries that you made, you'll be able to look at the query. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and we've now saved this query. What else can we do? Well, we can make a parameter query. So maybe we want a query that prompts us every time when we want to run the report. So I'm going to click File, Save As, Save Object As, and Save As again. And I'm going to call this a parameter query. I'm going to go back down here, and I'm going to turn city back on. I'm going to erase Gaston, and I will replace it with a bracket and then the term enter city and then a right bracket. Okay? So, if I run this query, I'm now prompted to enter a city. So let's enter Adelphia, because we know we have a city, a customer in Adelphia, and then I'll click OK. So now when I run the query, I get all the customers in the city of Adelphia. So you can see where this might be useful if we're looking at current customers in a given city and whether or not they have any money due, because we may have a sales agent going to one location they could drop by the other locations. All right, I'm going to save this query, and we're going to move on to the next one, which is to use a number as a criterion. So I'm going to go back to Design View, and in this particular query, tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and close this. Just to get into the habit of creating new queries, I'm going to do Query Design. I will select the customer table and add it. And let's add our fields. So we want the customer number. We want customer name, amount paid, and current due. And in this particular query, we're going to add a specific criterion. So for current due, we want to know all customers who owe us exactly $0. And if I go ahead and run this query, I see that there's only one customer that has $0 due. Now we could just as easily change that, and we are going to do just that. So I'm going to click Save, and I'm going to save this query as amount due equals 0 as our query name. Now, we could get a little bit more specific in our criteria design. So I'm going to go ahead and close this query, and I'm going to create a new query. Click Query Design, Add Customer, and actually I don't want customer for this query. So I'm going to go ahead and close this query, and I'm going to start a new one. Query Design. I'm going to add book rep this time. I'm going to pull down so I can see all of the fields. And let's add book rep number, last name, first name, and start date. Now, what would happen if I accidentally double-clicked and I added start date too many times? Is there any way that I can get rid of this field? Yes, I actually can. If I click the field in the gray area up above, I can actually highlight the entire field that is going to be added to the query, and then I can press the delete key on the keyboard. So now I've got book rep number, last name, first name, and start date. And we want to find all employees, and in the criteria we're going to use the greater than symbol, and we're going to put in the date 1/1 of 2013. This query will now find all employees that started after the 1st of 2013. So I'll go ahead and click Run, and I'll see that I have 3 employees that started after the 1st of the year 2013. Alright, I'm going to save this query. Save object, save as. And I will call this one comparison operator query. And again, you can call it anything you want. You don't have to follow what I'm putting in necessarily. If it's something that you will remember easier, by all means type that in instead. It'll make it much easier for you. So that was a comparison operator that we used. Now we can use compound criteria, which you probably knew was coming. In our database, if we want, we can search for one piece of information and another piece of information, and that's fairly typical in databases. So in this case, we're actually going to use 2 pieces of information. So I'm going to go ahead and do a create, and I'll use the query design, and in this case I will be using the customer table. and I want to see all the fields again, and very quickly I'm going to add customer number, customer name, amount paid, current due, returns, and book rep number. For our criterion, well, let's find out. What should we do? In the returns field, it's important to us to know which customers owe us money. So we will say, show me any, well, let me rephrase that. We're going to want to find out any customers that have returns owed to them greater than 0. And in this case, we're specifically looking for book rep number 42. So if you think about it, basically we're saying we want to know all customers who owe us anything above 0 in returns, and they happen to also work with customer book rep number 42. So these are called AND criteria, meaning that both of these operators must be met in order for a record to display. So I will click select, and I now have 3 records with returns above $0 and the book rep number 42. So I'll click the save button, and I'll call this compound criterion, oops, can't spell very well, with AND. Now, what if we wanted 2 pieces of information, and instead of AND, we wanted OR? Case in point, let's go back to the view on this query. Right now it says any returns greater than 0 and customer 42. Let's remove book rep 42, and down here on this next line it says OR, and I will type in 42 again as an example. Now what's going to happen? Well, basically any records that have a customer that is owed more than $0 for a return, or have book rep number 42, will be displayed. Those records will be displayed. So we should have a few more records. Let's click the run, and we certainly do. We definitely have more records. Now look at here, we have book rep number 42. Well, they owe us $0, but because we use the OR operator, it still displays. And here's another one. And this one met both criteria, so probably the first criteria made it get pulled in. It doesn't matter which one. Okay, now this one I'm going to do File, Save As, Save Object, Save. And this one says Copy. We'll just call it Compound Criterion with OR. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and close this query. Let's consider sorting. The goal of sorting, of course, is to make the most relevant information appear at the top of the query, or in some cases at the bottom of the query. So let's create a brand new query. So we're going to go back to Create, and we'll do Query Design. And for this particular one, we are going to use Customer again. We'll add Customer, and we will close. And then the only field we're going to add is City. So we're adding City from Table Customer, and we're going to change the sort order to ascending. And we are then going to run the query, and basically we now see all of the cities that we have customer contacts in. And of course there are duplications because in reality we have multiple records, in other words multiple customers in these cities. So as good as this query is, it really could be a little better, couldn't it? What if a manager said, can you give me a quick report? They usually call it a report, but they really mean a query, but that's okay, because you can make a report on a query, can't you? Or you could print out the query and it kind of looks like a report. So if somebody says to you, I need a report on all the cities that we have customers in. Now, of course, this list is very small, but you can imagine a very large company, and this is just a subset of data, so in reality, this database might be much, much larger. And they don't want duplicates. So let's go back to View, and if we go to Design, which we're already on, we can bring up the property sheet on the right hand side. Now if the property sheet does not display everything that we need to see, all we have to do is click on the empty field to the right of the city that we have added to this query. And we want to change in the property sheet view the unique value to yes. Okay? So if I run this query again, I now have a list of the cities where we have customers without duplication. So we're showing unique values. So you can imagine the previous version of this particular query. Well, what if we had business in 4,000 cities and we had 20,000 records? Well, we would have a huge list of duplicates. If we want to provide a report with only those cities that we do business in, and we only need one instance or a unique copy of it, we can limit it to only one value. And you can see why I say when you're running a report, the first version you might hand somebody in a real database and it might be 20 or 30 pages, so they've got to sift through all of those pages to look at all the different cities. In this case, we use the unique value to limit it, and if we did really do business in, say, 4,000 cities, it would only list those specific cities one time. So I think I'll go ahead and save this criteria. Why don't we call this one oh, I don't know. What would you call it? Remove duplicate cities query. How about that? Okay. So we've now done that query. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this query. And I'm going to go to Create, Query Design. And I'm going to add the customer table. And I will close that. I'll pull down this. By the way, we can close the property sheet now. And I'm going to add customer number, customer name, book rep number, and amount paid. And our goal in this query is to actually sort on multiple keys. And there's some rules. You'll notice that I added book rep number before amount paid. Well, there was a reason for that. In the case of this particular query, if we wanted to sort ascending by first the book rep number, and then we could do sort ascending by amount paid, the sort will first occur on book rep number, secondly on amount paid, and it's all depending on the order that each of the fields appear in the query from left to right. We'll first start with ascending, and then we'll switch this, and you can see it as descending. So let's run the query. Book rep number starting with 42, amount paid begins ascending 0. So all of book rep number or employee number 42's customers and their amounts paid. Let's go back to design view and change this to descending. So we'll leave book rep number as ascending and amount paid as descending. And if I run this again, now for book rep number 42 we see that the amount paid is actually the highest number now, which means it's descending. Highest number first, lowest number last in the book rep number ascending criteria. Alright, let's save this one. We're going to save this query as multiple, they call it key, you can call it field as well, multiple field query, no, let's call it multiple field sort, because we actually sorted on 2 different fields. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this one. You can see we've produced quite a few queries and we have a lot more to go. What if we wanted a query that only showed the top results? I actually can pull that query up again, so let's locate that query. Multiple field sort. So I will double click the query and it will run. I can go back to design view, and if I wanted to, actually if I go back to run, well no, I guess you can't do it there, it has to be in design view. I can tell it to return the top 5 records, the top 25 records, the top 100, the top 5%, 25%, or all of them. So I'm going to change this to the top 5 records and I will run the query. So you now see that we have the top 5 records that appeared, but the sorting rules still apply. So if I wanted to see the top 5 amounts paid despite the book rep number, I could click view and I could change the ascending to not sorted for book rep number and run the query again, and this report is much more revealing. So this might be a regular daily query that's run and given as a report to a manager. Here's the top amounts we paid to the top 5 customers today. I'm not going to save this, but hopefully you get the idea. If you wanted to, you could save it as a different name, and you can see how easy it was for us to make changes to get information that helps us, again, instead of throwing tons of information at a manager or a fellow employee, you're actually giving them exactly what they're asking for. I want to see the top 5 customers in descending order by amount paid. Okay, I'm going to close this query. I am not going to save this one. Now we're to the point where we need to talk about joining tables. Now this one's the fun query, but I'm going to tell you right now, if we did not set up our tables correctly, we'll have a bit of a problem, and I'll explain that to you in just a moment. If I open up customer and I open up book rep, and in book rep I want to go into design view, and then I'll click customer and I want to go into design view. The key to getting your tables to link correctly so that we can do join queries, which essentially means running a query where we're using more than one table, is to make sure that the book rep number field in both tables is exactly the same name, the same data type, and the same field size. it's imperative that each of these pieces of information is exactly the same. I can't be sure if it matters if the caption, well, I shouldn't say the caption, the description is different. I don't think that would hurt anything, but the field name, the data type, and the field size must be the same. So I'm in customer database. I now will switch to the book rep database, and I'll confirm that the name book rep number is exactly the same. The data type is short text, and we can see the description is different, so it really doesn't matter what's in the description as long as the name is the same, the type is the same, and the field size is the same. As long as those three things are exactly the same, we won't have any problem doing a join. Remember, this is a relational database, so the two tables relate to each other using the book rep field. So they must be the same in each table. So I will close this table, and I will close this table. Then I will go to create. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to join two tables. So let's go ahead and do query design. And again, I have two tables. I'm going to add book rep, and I will add customer, and then I will close. And you can see right away that we have a curious looking line here between our two tables, and look what the line indicates. It has joined the two tables. They relate now using the book rep number field in both. We know that this one is the primary instance of the particular field because this is where the record origin begins. So the book rep number is created here. Okay, so let's join these tables. So we know that they are now related. When we run this query, we can actually query for information from both tables. So what I'm going to do is add book rep number, the last name and first name of our book rep employee, the first, oh excuse me, I got the first name. Then we want the customer number, and even though they don't add it in the book, I'm going to add customer name. And is there anything else we need? No. And we're going to set the order as ascending for both the book rep number, sort ascending, and the customer number, sort ascending. Alright, let's run this query. So now we have a table that shows all the different book rep numbers, their last names, their first names, the customer number, and customer names. And let's go ahead and save this. We'll call it rep customer join query. Okay, so we did our first join. Let's go back to design view, and we can make a few changes to this. Here's the thing. I'm going to run that query one more time. I see only book rep employees that have customers. Think about it for a moment. Do you think it's possible that we have an employee who doesn't yet have a customer assigned to them? Or is it possible we have a customer that does not have a book rep employee assigned to them? This particular report is not showing us that. So we need to make some adjustments. Let's click View and see what we're able to do. If we click the Join link here one time, not twice, just one time, and then right click, we can actually look at the join properties. Actually, that was the properties. I don't want the properties, I want the join properties. So I'm going to go back and click that line, and I'm going to click join properties. So we should see if we're correctly selecting the link here. The mouse pretty much has to be right on it. We see that many options, we know we're not. So I'm going to click it again, and now I'm going to select join properties. On the left, which is correct, we have the book rep as the left table name. On the right is customer. Right now it says only include rows where the joined fields from both tables are equal, which basically means they must have a book rep and it must be linked to a customer. But wait, include all records from book rep whether or not they have a customer. Let's try option number 2. We'll click OK, and with this query, I'll click on the Design tab and I will click Run. Now look, I do have a new employee. Well, it could be new. We didn't include the date field when they started, so we can't say if they're new. But we can say that this employee has no customers. So if we have a new customer added on, or we have an employee with too many customers, we could move a couple over to this particular employee. Let's go back to Design View, and let's click on that relationship and do Join Properties again. And let's go to number 3. Let's see if there's any customers we could give that employee. So if I click OK and I click Run again, I will see that in actuality all of our customers are currently accommodated with an employee. So if we had a brand new customer record added, for example, and they did not have an employee linked to them yet, they still would have showed up here. Okay, so I'll go back to View. You don't have to save this one. It's just a feature that you need to know about that's really, really helpful. Now, just as with, I'm going to go ahead and close this query. Just as with any table, you can create a report from any query you want. So if I click Customer Query, for example, and I go to Create, I can generate a report fairly quickly. Let's try Rep Customer Join Query. So I could go ahead and create a report from this simply by selecting Report, and it automatically generates a report for me. And this particular report almost fits on a single page. We could very easily shrink some of these columns because they don't need to be as large as they are. And then the entire report would fit on one page. Alright, I'm not going to save that report, but I just wanted to show you that it's very easy to create reports based on any query. Just as easily, if we wanted to, we could create a form based on the query that we ran. Now, one thing to keep in mind after you save this form is it is possible if somebody runs the form to delete information because these are live records. A form is just a way of viewing the record in the real database, even if you used a query. You got to keep that in mind. With a query, if you delete a record in a query, you are deleting the record in the table of the database, and that's goes for forms as well. Alright, I'm not going to save that form. Okay. You'll remember that we used Excel to import information into our database. Just as easily, we could use Excel to export. Now, what if we wanted to calculate some statistics in the query? Well, we can very easily do that as well. So let's create a new query. I'm going to close the current query we have open. I'm going to click on Create. I will click on Query Design. I'm going to add the customer table. I'll resize it, even though I'm just adding a single field, but it's a good habit to get into. And let's add the amount paid field. Now, in reality, I probably would be adding more information, such as customer number, customer name, but I just want to show you really quickly that we can actually do some simple math. I'm going to click the totals option, and if I go here, I now see I have a total row which currently says group by. If I click that field, I can change the option to sum, or if I wanted to, I could do average. There's many others as well, but let's try average and see what we get. So I'm going to run the query. So what is this? This is the average amount of money paid to our customers. Okay. Let's go back to Design View, and we're going to include the book rep number in this particular query. Now, right now we have the total is the average. Keep in mind we could add criteria and we could find out what the average is on amount paid by book rep number. So I'll run the query and I see that book rep number has an average paid of $15,287.23. Okay. Let's go back to Design View. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and save this. So with this criteria, we did our first statistic. So I'm going to do Save As, Save Objects. And we'll call this one Average Statistics. And I will close it. Alright, I'm going to go back to Create and Query Design, and I'll go into the customer table again, and I'm going to add book rep number and amount paid. I actually would rather have the amount paid be first, so if I wanted to, I could click the drop down and I could select amount paid here, and over here I could just as easily select book rep number. Now, keep in mind I'm going to turn on totals again, and in the group by for amount paid, again I'll go to total, and I am going to change the amount paid to average, and for book rep number I will change this one to where, and our criterion will be 42. So this is a little bit different query. We're going to get a sum total, where the book rep number equals 42. So that would be all of the customers who use book rep number 42. So let's go ahead and run this query. And we have a sum total of 76,436. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and close this query. And I do want to save it. I'm going to call this query criteria using where clause. So the where criteria got us a sum of all the customers for book rep number 42. Alright, I'm going to close everything I had open. I still had a relationships tab open that I did not need. On this particular query, we're going to do a crosstab. So I'm going to click create, and I am going to select the query wizard this time and crosstab query. This one's a little bit tricky, so I'll take it step by step. So once I've selected crosstab query, I'll click OK, and then I'm going to select the table is customer, and then I'll click next, and we're going to add the state field. So we've added state as the selected field. Then we'll click next again, and we will select book rep number as the field to select for column headings. So book rep number here by state, and then I'll click next again, and then we get the crosstab query wizard. And we are going to click the returns field, and in this case we want sum of returns. Then I'll click the next button again, and it'll give me some options to view or modify the query. And I'm going to leave this as customer crosstab up here. We could add something more specific as well. We could say state rep customer crosstab, which is definitely much more informational. So I will click finish, and I now have my query. And in this query, I can now see the state, the total returns, and which particular book rep number employees have which return amounts. So if we were just looking at total returns by state, we may say, well, that's not really very revealing. Where's the problem at? And we could see here that book rep number 65 actually had the greater amount of returns, so we might want to look deeper into that. And keep in mind that just because book rep number 65 has the greater amount of returns doesn't mean that they're doing something wrong. They may have a greater number of sales, so we might want to run another query that shows total returns and total sales by book rep number to see exactly how many dollars in sales this particular employee is actually making. Alright, I'm going to close that query. So what have we done? Well, we've run a series of different queries on the database, and hopefully you've learned quite a lot on some of the more powerful queries and the ability that Access has. If you enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again on future FastGadgets tutorial videos. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.